Hi, very quick video here, but something which I think is of interest and importance. And this is to do with the elements work, which I've talked of loads of times, with its origins in Tamar de Jong and his colleagues. And for me, I came to that through the work of Richard Gardner, who was a tarot reader and a metaphysician, as he would have termed it, and an author. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole thing about the elements work here, but essentially, the elements the elements work shows or is based upon the perception that there are different forms of consciousness which you can link to the classical elements of earth, air, fire, and water, and their combinations, and that there are basically different kinds of people because of the different kinds of consciousness that they have, yeah, or the different kinds of consciousness that they tend to inhabit. Now, that doesn't mean things don't change for people, but it means they have natures, they have specific kinds of natures, though everyone is individual also. So it's there's lots of nuance in the whole view of it, yeah. Richard's thing, in part, was that we have these different sorts of consciousness, which he tended to characterize as masculine and feminine, and according to the elements, and that the combination of these things, the union of these things, would lead to a kind of superconsciousness. Richard's way of looking at this was that superconsciousness was absolutely miraculous, and all sorts of things could become possible there. Yeah, all sorts of things. Yeah, extended life, infinitely extended life. Magical powers, levitation, what have you. Yeah. I think Tammo also had the idea of superconsciousness. Tammo de Jong. I think his idea of superconsciousness seemed somewhat more modest, probably more realistic, at least in the medium term, I would say. Though I'm never going to say never, all sorts of things. I'm perfectly certain that all sorts of things are possible, which we can't even imagine now. Yeah. So look, always keep that there. Anything is possible. You know, before you find out it isn't anyway. But and things change. So please keep that in mind. There's so much that we don't understand. There's so much that we have no idea about in terms of how the world works, how we work, and what really is possible in terms of ourselves and the universe and what have you. Yeah, and our natures. But Tamer's ideas were more psychologically oriented, and I think his idea of superconsciousness was yeah, it was couched in terms which would probably seem nearer to sort of Jungian and subsequent transpersonal psychology. Yeah. Whereas Richard was out and out magic, basically. And part of why I loved him, really. But now, one of the things that Richard had was that this superconsciousness could be brought about through magical lovemaking, which was one of the things he was very strong about. Both he and Tammo had a very strong emphasis upon relationship, and how relationship was very, very key to this issue, and I absolutely agree with that. But one of the things that Richard had was about magical lovemaking, and I remember he used to say, or used to write in his books, that people in relationships, and this is even if they're in the right relationships, yeah, and they're developing the right things to combine with each other. I know that sounds a bit mechanistic, but it's not quite like that, because we do have specific natures to an extent, but his idea was that by this lovemaking, energies would combine energies, and this leads to a kind of liberation of the people involved. They achieve some whatever degree of superconsciousness. Yeah. However, to have this kind of really high functioning, if you like, lovemaking, and this extraordinary relationship, this very beautiful relationship of love. It's very much a love relationship, but one which includes all of the being, body, soul, everything. Yeah. He used to say that it's as if the connections almost become kind of like rusted or furred up. Yeah. You know, and so we needed a sort of like a cleansing every so often. We needed to have a cleansing. And then once there is this cleansing, then the energy can flow again and you find this thing can work. And what really strikes me is that sense of the energy flowing and of the furring up of the connections. This is something which I think we all experience in relationships anyway, at least if the relationships are important enough. And excuse the coffee maker. And the the thing is, I think what we experience is we experience blockages, and those blockages leave us, on the one hand, involved in ourselves without even knowing it, on the other hand, in a codependent state. Yeah, but it's a codependency of almost like a codependency of narcissism, if you see what I mean. And these are very, very common things. This is extremely, extremely common predicament for people to be in. Now, and the thing is, what happens is that tends to precipitate crises, and in those crises, if they are engaged in honestly enough, yeah, the two people will kind of break open that shell, and then there is a kind of catharsis, and then there is a possibility, and then there is this cleansing, and in the aftermath of that cleansing, then there is this renewed connection, and the energy flows again, and we come just a little bit closer to superconsciousness, or whatever you want to call it, this divine consciousness, this beautiful, beautiful consciousness of embodied love and relationship. Yeah. And being. Yeah. But what also occurs to me is that what that implies is that there is a practice in relationship, which probably, I don't think it's not that it can occur and these crises don't happen and the blockages don't occur, but there can be a way of occupying the middle ground, so to speak, which itself can't be stuck to because life isn't like that. It will take you to all sorts of places. But occupying a sort of a ground where you can be aware of the process rather than simply subject to it. And therefore, you can remember, and there is this remembrance of relationship and this remembrance of how two people are in relationship to each other. A remembrance, in a sense of, the limitations are very important. The problems are always very important. They're significant, yeah. But the point is that what you're doing is you're finding what your poison is and transforming that through bringing awareness to it in real time. And quite often that means things have to become painful enough for that to happen and for this spell of narcissism to be disrupted. Yeah, which is partly what I think what happens in relationship crises of this sort. Yeah, and so through experience, yeah, there arises an awareness of the kind of process. These processes are bigger than our conscious minds and are bigger than our conscious identities. So of course, this is it's a kind of cumulative process, I think, in a sense. Very often there are sudden breakthroughs, sudden liberations, but the actual process as it unfolds and takes place is more ongoing, yeah, but it's one which you can come to be increasingly conscious of, and actually approach your life your life with, and especially your life with the person you're in a relationship with. It's approached with a sort of, it's almost like it's a meditative quality, but it's a meditative quality of feeling, I think, yeah. Because what all of these things open us up to is the inwardness of ourselves and another person, and our difference and our commonality, and the inwardness of life. Yeah, I think that's what these things really open us to, in a sense. Yeah, um, but there is this quality, I think, of, it's almost like, if the electrodes or the connections are getting furred up, then you're dealing with trying to inhabit a consciousness which is just that little bit more self-cleansing, self-cleaning, if you see what I mean. Yeah, and more aware of it, so that you can both, and this is the important thing, has to be both people, I think. You can both come to honor the nature of the relationship and each other, your individuality, your individual pains, your individual wounds and problems, which are, in many ways, the ground in which the jewel is buried. Yeah, and so this is why you can't just have a cut across the whole thing and achieve a perfect life type of approach. This is why you can't just say, I'm going to avoid all problems in a really deep relationship. It's not the point, really. It's so painful to go through them that you have to find a way, to you have to find a way to cooperate with this process. Yeah, the process wants you to get there, but you have to find a way, to actually cooperate with it, and so that you can achieve this sort of, like, yeah, like I'm saying, it's like a middle ground. It's a sort of middle ground which doesn't deny that these processes are happening, and that they are painful, and that they are difficult, and that they involve experiences of failure. But in another sense, there isn't any failure. If there's honesty and true intention, then there isn't any failure. And if there's commitment, there isn't any failure. Yeah. And so these things, you know, I think these things allow something to unfold, which is part, I think, of the method and practice of what sounded so out there in terms of Richard's description. But when it comes down to it, it's not out there. It's very real life. And it's very everyday life in many ways. The stuff of it is very everyday life in many ways. But anyway, that's what I wanted to say today. It's a very quick video. Yeah, it's mainly about relationship, and the blocks to what Richard and Tama called superconsciousness, and in a sense, the purpose of those blocks, and what unfolds from their processing. And you can see this if you would want to look at the tarot, you'd see this process in a lot of ways, in probably the cards from Death, Temperance, the Devil, the Tower, and the Star, I'd say. And then after that, you get the Sun and Moon, which is which is taking into the ideas of the alchemical opus and things like that. But well, it kind of follows. If you start thinking about it, it covers the entire major arcana. But you can see very much this process in Devil, Tower, Star. And so what that says is, well, what do you do then? How do you approach this? How do you approach this? How do you get to approach this consciously? And I can see a lot in that Temperance card as well, really. But anyway, obviously the Star of Hope. That's where you're getting. That's what you need to remember as well. But anyway, hope that's maybe of interest. even of use. And speak to you soon. Bye bye.